clergy in Russia.
Was the Pope appealing for peace, or was he praying for peace?
And the same applies to the Kaliningrad.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what do you have to say about that, guys? Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Global Atheist News Review. This is where we say our views on the news. I have opinionated people to help me, and here's the first one. Frank, welcome. Frank is in Kentucky. Then there's Esther from the Midlands of the UK.
Hello, folks.
Welcome. David from the New York part of the city, in fact, Manhattan, I believe. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Often, yes.
Tersia from South Africa, little town called Worcester. So welcome, guys. I'm going to plunge straight into it's got the usual mixture of not very good things and some better things, gooder things. So item number one, there was a plan between Pope Francis and Patriarch Kirill to meet at an event that was coming up next month in Kazakhstan, a meeting of religious leaders. Pope Francis was said to be hoping for an encounter with Kirill on the sidelines of this event because, of course, Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, has been widely criticized for his justifications of the invasion of Ukraine. But Patriarch Kirill has pulled out. He won't be going to this meeting. And Pope Francis is a bit upset. What do you think of that?
Well, for one thing, the fact that he's canceling out tells us and the Pope a great deal, I think.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Well, to make a joke here, to see a man of God pull out.
David, this is a family show.
I hope there are no children watching. Or
well, if there was, they aren't now.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So that's the item number one dealt with. Now, going to America. In the state of Texas, there's a federal judge who has blocked the enforcement of federal guidance, which permitted emergency room abortions. Now, they were enforced. Well, the guidelines were sent by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which sent to healthcare providers by a guy called Becerra, who was the secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And the guidelines said that a 1986 law that mandated doctors to provide emergency health care to the poor requires physicians to provide abortions even when such actions may violate state law. So the U.S. District Judge, James Wesley Hendricks in Texas, disagreed with this. And there's now a case, the state of Texas versus Xavier Becerra. And he's ruled that the guidance cannot be enforced within Texas or against members of organizations who claim religious and conscientious objections to performing abortions.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go.
Well, the first thing to note is that such judgment cruelty is totally biblical, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the U.S., where more often than not, it appears that religious conviction trumps human and civil rights. right? So if you go to a pharmacist and you want the morning after pill or you want any type of contraception, if it violates the person's beliefs, whether it be Christian beliefs or whatever it is, they have a right to not prescribe you the medicine that your doctor has prescribed for you. And this gets to the much bigger issues of, you know, healthcare access,
Mm,
violence against women,
mm,
the idea that someone's faith can dictate your access to
yeah,
legal medical care.
yes.
And we see this on and on and on, and we see this as sort of a symphony of violence, if you will, religious violence,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, intertwined throughout the fabric of American culture, certainly in the last decade or two.
Yeah.
And I think it's really sad because, you know, you guys in Europe are very fortunate to
Hmm.
um, uh, uh, you know, have all of these accesses without um, the controversy
Yeah.
that is here. Like if you're in, and Frank, I'm sure you can back this up. You know, if you're in a red state, your access to healthcare in general is very, very different than it is back east.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is based on religious grounds, and it's very corrupting, and it's very sad. I'll stop. I'm sorry.
Well, it's unimaginable here, as I think Esther will agree.
Oh,
Yeah.
For
yes.
us, imagine going into a pharmacy with your prescription
Right.
and being told, I'm superior to your doctor and I'm not going to give you that medication that
Right.
you have been prescribed. That's outrageous.
Mhm.
It is outrageous. And, you know, the day that happens, then we have serious troubles here. And
Mm,
it's this I get it. Your beliefs are your beliefs.
Right.
You have the right to choose your beliefs. But then your beliefs and other people's beliefs. Other people don't agree with your belief system.
Right.
Right. So imagine if everyone with a belief decided to impose their beliefs on
yeah.
all of us. Just
Mhm.
imagine
Yeah.
how chaotic that would be,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But the people in this religion, I think because Christianity is the one religion with the most people in the world. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
You're
I
correct.
guess
You're
Mm,
correct.
so. I think they think somehow they're superior,
yeah.
and that must mean something. Now, because a whole lot of people follow a belief system does not equate to it being right.
No.
Mhm.
So,
And certainly not medically right.
oh,
No.
absolutely not.
Well, last
Well,
Well,
I
week
And
find,
yeah.
we had a surgical case, an example of this, didn't we? Where some poor woman in Texas was, it, she was scanned, and it turned out that her baby had no skull,
yeah,
and the hospital denied her an abortion. So
Mhm.
oh wow,
Yeah.
weird.
what I it's deeply ironic that this is the case in the land of the free and the home of the
mm,
brave. There was an author that some years ago did a very interesting. He wrote a book and he has a very interesting speech about the influence of the fantasy world of that it has on the American psyche, and that makes me think that America is supposed to be one of the most free countries in the world in terms of freedom of speech and um, the emphasis on the rights of the individual. But somewhere along the line, right to say what you believe and to hold a belief, and the right to enforce your belief, some way those two ideas have become conflated
Mm,
because that this is what's happening now.
Mhm.
The beliefs that some people hold are now being enforced onto others. And if you criticize the beliefs, then you are called with then you are held to taken to be accountable for criticizing the person. And
yes.
that is something unique to America at the moment. I don't know whether that would be the case in most European countries.
Mhm.
Not even in South Africa is that the case.
Yeah. I mean, it's no wonder that the rest of the world, you know, gets past and sees the convolution of the marketing of the home of the free and the brave, and then what's really happening, boots on the ground in terms of civil society, the rule of law, body autonomy, right?
Yeah.
So you can believe anything you want. If you don't want an abortion, don't have an abortion.
Yes.
But it's when your religious beliefs become politicized and become law that you have a right to believe anything you want until your fist touches my nose.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with a lot of this religious indoctrination and religious belief, and we've seen it throughout the centuries. It's not new,
Yeah.
but it certainly is a huge conflict in the United States, simply because where there was and remains, although much less so, a separation of church and state. You see all of these holes in the dike, and the water's flying through. What it means to be secular almost depends on what administration is running your state and is running the nation.
Yeah.
And I thought that they would say that you had free will in this religion. You have free will. So what happened to people's free will to have an abortion?
Right.
I thought
Right.
God allowed people to choose. If they chose the path that would lead to condemnation, destruction, like the case of Adam and Eve, right? There were two choices. And they chose, well, because they said God gave, they have free will, and God gave them the right to exercise free will. So I don't understand how you can say you have free will, but that free will does not apply to having an abortion if you choose to have one.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Absolutely. And it certainly doesn't give you freedom to impose your will on me.
Right.
Oh no.
But I gotta say, it depends on what part of the Bible you happen to be reading.
Right.
The Bible also, in many places, stifles freedom by death. I mean, by command of God. And so, we have to reason our way to it, and we have to do that, I think, moment by moment, setting aside many old things in the process of doing it. The freedom that we celebrate in America, and that the reputation America has around the world, I think it's genuine, relatively speaking, to most countries. But it waxes and wanes, and it's on a wane right now, and we're struggling to keep it.
Yeah. Well, the next item is relevant to that too, because you remember Steve Bannon, who was a former advisor to former President Donald Trump. He helped lead Trump's plan to steal the 2020 election, which of course Trump still thinks he won and is still campaigning and holding rallies to raise funds, possibly for his next run at the presidency. Well, Steve appeared on a World Prayer Network call. I guess it was a virtual call like this one. And he said, what we need is poll workers. If we want to win, your congregations have to be in the counting rooms and prepared to have those knife fights. So he still thinks this was a prayer call, remember, to the religious.
And he doesn't be there to help.
No, he wants.
He doesn't.
He wants them to count the results the way he would like them to turn out.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
Bannon is one of a group of Trumpsters that honestly, or at least seems to honestly and deeply believe that the ends justifies any and all means.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Trumpsters clearly think that, and and he's a leader of that kind of thinking. Bannon.
Yeah.
I saw a funny post on my Facebook feed this evening. It shows Donald Trump and Jesus walking on water. And then at one stage it says, "What would Jesus do?" And the next image has Jesus drowning Donald Trump.
Oh, if you,
Yes.
Tersia, you need to send that to me.
Yes, I love that.
I'll see if I can find it.
Well, you know, they're all disciples of Roy Cohn.
Yeah.
If you don't know the name, Roy Cohn was this attorney who really helped formulate the idea of never apologizing, never admit you're wrong, double
Yeah.
down even when you're wrong, and use every means necessary within the courts to slow down justice.
What a nice man.
Yeah, he was, just a very sad and sick individual. I think, if I remember correctly, he worked for Joe McCarthy during the communist witch hunts as an attorney back in the 50s in the United States, and really was this just monster of a human being. And, Trump went to his quote unquote school. Bannon went to his school. They all are students of Roy Cohn.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point. Bannon is the Cohen of the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Something that you guys might find interesting, and when you mentioned Roy Cohn, how he goes back to the 1950s.
Yeah.
And we are so short-sighted when we look at things that happen. And if you take it's what 60 odd years ago, and the influence of such a person still carries through as long as there's somebody alive who holds to those ideas and ideals. And that is what Dr. Tai always says. It's not the individual person who's dangerous. It's anybody that, and the more followers, the greater the danger. But the followers of people like that, and the negative legacy that is left by people like that. So we must guard against being short-sighted. It struck me, David, that this guy lived in the 1950s, and the influence can be directly traced back to people like him and the influence that he gained, and that's why we have to guard against such influences taking hold today, because the influences that take hold today will have a legacy. And so Dr. Tai, I just quoted you, despite the fact that you're not wearing your fancy shirt today.
No.
Yeah.
Don't encourage him.
Esther, I love your hair.
Me too.
Thank you. You're the second one to say so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me be the
I
third.
appreciate that.
All in favor?
Yes, in favor. Yes.
Nice. Thank you.
Okay.
Tersia, for quoting me, go buy a donkey. I think that's how you say it, right?
Buy a donkey.
Okay. So, staying with the US, something good might be about to happen, because there's a famous doctor. He's a heart surgeon who's a bit of a celebrity because he's been hosting daytime TV's Dr. Oz show. And he's a Muslim, and he's standing for the US Senate. And if he does get elected, he'll be the first Muslim ever to serve in the chamber.
Oh.
But apparently, he's keeping it quiet. He's a Muslim. He doesn't bring it up in campaigning. His Democrat, because he's a Republican, his Democratic opponent isn't raising it. And so it's hardly a topic of conversation. And in any case, the Muslim electorate isn't monolithic, unlike the Baptist electorate. So they won't necessarily vote for a candidate because they share his religion. anyway, it's interesting, isn't it, that could the American Senate be about to go cosmopolitan?
Wait, wasn't Obama a secret Muslim?
That's the rumor.
Yeah.
Well, this guy, Dr. Oz, is just he borders on quackery. If you've seen some of the things that he's, especially during the pandemic, was coming up with all these grifter type cures for COVID. He's he's a doctor in the way Ben Carson was a brain surgeon.
Yeah.
He went to medical school. He got his degree. I don't think I would step a mile into his office. He's also running in the state of Pennsylvania, and considering that he owns like 5 houses and is never in the state, how he's going to represent a state that he actually doesn't live in is another big issue.
Yeah. Well, if you're a TV celebrity, you live in every state, don't you?
Yeah, I guess so.
You do.
Well, I know several MDs who regard him to be a quack. So.
Are you sure it's Dr. Oz and not Dr. Is or Dr. Huh? Or Dr. Hey? I mean, there's a lot of other doctors out there.
Most of the news today is coming from the US. Here's another one. There's a small city called Madrid in northern part of New York State, where there's a Christian Fellowship Center, and the leaders have been charged with first-degree sexual abuse of a child. There's a guy called Sean Ferguson, and his very own sister tweeted that the Pentecostal church knew about his abuse of his own daughter, I think, 5 years ago. Oh, 2 daughters. So this is going on. But the pastor of this small church hasn't reported the fact that they knew this abuse 5 years ago to the police or to the Children Protective Services or to the broader community of the church, because his approach to addressing this sort of crisis is to claim that he's under no moral obligation unless someone can conclusively demonstrate that he should do because of Scripture.
John, we were talking about sex during the earlier show on the Free Thought Hour today. And I think one of the conclusions that we came to is that it's really important that we support sexual education in schools, not only so kids can know, what options there are in terms of their identity, but like understand how to do it, that it's not as a repressed society, but also that they can recognize instances of sexual abuse and speak up to it. Because it's when we don't talk about this or make it well known that kids don't have a frame of reference for when they've been taken advantage of. And for children specifically, that's rape. That is, they can't give consent. And so we need to be able to have vehicles to recognize rape even at a young age. I know it sounds audacious to say, but if we can recognize theft, murder, sexual abuse should be one of them too. And if you're a victim of it, you should be able to speak up and immediately recognize situations like that. And it's the people who don't want that to be known could be the culprits. We need to make sure that we can speak up to that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what really sticks in my craw here is the actions of the pastor, who he said his process in regard to those caught in sin, including those sins that have potential criminal bearing, includes repentance, cleansing, deliverance, and reconciliation through the cross. So his priority is to see sinners experience the healing and restoration that Jesus provides.
It almost sounds like he goes about causing suffering so that he can focus on the biblical solution or aftermath. But this caught my eye right off. Quiverful. This is
Yes.
quiverful church. That means fully loaded with arrows. It's like magazine full, for your semi-automatic weapon or your automatic weapon. Very strange name for a church.
Well,
Yeah.
they don't want it to mean that. What they mean, their quiver is the family. So what they are referring to is shooting as many sperms at as many eggs as
Yeah.
and getting.
Then the quiver. Then I'm sure Dr. Francesca Stavrakopoulou, who wrote about the anatomy of God, will have something to say about that quiver, full of arrows that might be also not suitable for a family show if you think about the male anatomy. But I just want to say something about that strikes me about this story. And I don't know how many of you watched our episode last night with Pastor Allen. And I was at times quite frustrated because it just boiled down to yes, no, yes, isn't. And afterwards, I had a long discussion with my husband. I thought, why is it worthwhile having these conversations? And Alan is really a nice guy, and many Christians are really nice people. So is it really, shouldn't one just let it go? But when I hear things like this, then I feel that there is a purpose behind these types of conversations, and the reason is that as long as we are willing to use the Bible as a text to guide their lives, then we will have situations like these.
Yeah.
Because the Bible is so vague that any person can use any text from it to justify almost any position, regardless of whether they are. And the trouble is, when you have nice people using nice parts of the Bible to justify their good or benevolent behavior, it's not a problem. But we get the opposite as well. We get malignant people who use even the nice parts of the Bible to justify horrific negligence and awful behavior. And that is the problem.
Well, my attitude towards that, I think that moderates are sort of permitting fundamentalists by not objecting to them,
Yeah.
I also want to give credit to the nice people who follow the Bible. It's not because of the Bible that they're nice. That's just called obedience. When you're nice because you think you're going to get an award for it, which is after you die, you'll get sent to heaven. That's not truly being nice. That's not intrinsically nice. That's just obedience out of sake of getting a better prize. And I want someone who has better intentions than just that.
Yeah,
because
absolutely. Well, these people in this church, the Christian Fellowship Center, you remember Me Too? This group of
the Me Too movement, yes.
This group of women who felt they'd been raped and wanted to band together and protest against male abuse. Well, they formed CFC 2, Christian Fellowship Center 2. And they said, we are survivors of abuse at the Christian Fellowship Center. We've experienced spiritual, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse at the hands of the leaders and members. And they have offered people who have similar experiences to give their first-hand accounts to them. And 18 individuals have shared stories of physical or sexual abuse with CFC2. Meanwhile, come in, David.
Oh, no, go ahead. I'll wait till you're done. I mean, I don't want
to. Okay. Well, I was going to say, meanwhile, Catherine Joyce, who wrote a book, 13 years ago, on the Quiverful movement, said the movement is all about leaving your fertility in God's hand.
If I may, this is a stone's throw away from Margaret Atwood's A Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
The idea that this fictionalized account, when it was first written in, I don't know, the 1970s, the 1980s, was seen as horror because of the implications of obedience and disobedience to Scripture, that men are in charge of this. that followers will follow it blindly.
Yeah.
And here it is playing out over and over again
Yeah.
in our secular lives, and not just in the United States. Go to South and Central America, go to Africa, even go to Europe. There are these leaders who will swear up and down that they have, the right interpretation, and there'll be enough people who will believe it, who will allow them to participate or at least support this violence. And it's typically and always, and I know I say this often, turns out to be violence against women and children.
Yeah. Poor people who believe it, eh?
Yeah.
Moving to Africa, a fair bit north of you, Tersia, in Zimbabwe, congregations can be seen each Saturday worshipping outside under a tree or beside a main road, dressed in pristine white clothes. They're part of the Apostolic Church. And there's thought to be about 3.5 million of them in the country. And they teach, listen to this, opposition towards Western medicine and belief in faith healing and prayer. And the result is these congregations have become a stronghold of anti-vaccination sentiment. Guess what? A spiraling measles outbreak has killed more than 150 children, and cases in one part of Zimbabwe have now accelerated to around 2,000 children affected, and in the past week the death toll has almost doubled.
As a living right next door to Zimbabwe, I'm very concerned about this, because not only do we have open borders, not officially, but in practice, we have an open border with Zimbabwe. There are millions of documented and millions of undocumented Zimbabweans in South Africa. And I have personal experience of this apostolic church, because we used to have a chap that we gave him and his family housing for at least 3 years, and we supported them financially in exchange for a little bit of work. But he was staunchly anti-vax, anti any form of science, and it's very easy to go there when you have a very limited education to begin with, in any case, because this chap was in his late 30s, and he didn't have the benefit of proper schooling, because under the rule of Robert Mugabe, Zimbabwe has been declining for the past 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And as a South African, it makes me very concerned, because it's just a question of time when the infections will spread into South Africa.
Yeah.
And the Apostolic Church has a similar presence in South Africa, because of also the influx of many displaced people. And well, it just motivates me to speak out against ignorance brought on by false beliefs. And we just have to continue to explain how things work in the real world. And if that means stepping on the toes of religious people, well, then so be it.
It's for their own good.
Absolutely. And I think it's this whole faith movement and faith in God, speaking it into existence. Many of the preachers tell their followers that you are sick because you don't have faith. Anyone who has faith doesn't get sick, because Jesus came to bear our sicknesses upon himself, so that we're not sick. He came to be poor, so we're not poor. He came to he took on everything, so we're not these things. So telling people that only people who have no faith are sick. If you have some churches tell the followers to stop taking their medicines, to stop taking their what's been prescribed by a doctor, because it's crazy that people. Unfortunately, that's just the state of religion, Christianity in Africa. And how do you start? Where do you begin? Just as Tersia was saying, you just have to carry on speaking. You just have to carry on exposing these things. And I think for a lot of these people, access to healthcare, they don't have this access to healthcare. So they would rather go to church where there might be God might just do something for them, because what other choice have they got?
I was going to say that, Esther, it's not even a question of they would rather go to church. In many places in my own country, and even more so in Zimbabwe, the only option is going to church, and that's why the missionaries sent by, especially the United States, and it upsets me because it almost endorses the terrible corruption perpetrated by governments, because in this case it really is like Karl Marx said, religion is the opium of the masses, and we have governments who steal tax funds, line their own pockets, and prey on these people who have nothing but their faith. And it's just a terrible situation. And once again, I would like to say my old thing of don't think because you're in Europe or in America that this will not affect you, because measles is a virus, and viruses do not adhere to borders, and viruses mutate. So it will have an effect sometime sooner or later in the wider world out there. Sorry about that.
Well, Obama didn't write a book called The Audacity of Hope for no reason. He knew what a double-edged sword hope is, because it can lead you down the right path or the wrong one equally well. Okay, staying in Africa, going up to the Horn of Africa, we mentioned this last week because there was a hotel that was demolished by a militant group. But apparently, the Prime Minister of Somalia, a chap called Hamza Abdi Barre, has appointed, listen to this, the former deputy leader and co-founder of the Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab, that was responsible for the uproar last week, as the Minister of Religious Affairs.
Yikes.
He reckons that he's doing it to try and put the guy in opposition to the group that he founded. Well, watch this space. We'll see what happens.
I hope it doesn't backfire.
So that's a disaster waiting to happen.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, walking on thin ice here. Going to Turkey, there's a pop star called Gülsün Karaköklü, she's a 46-year-old singer and songwriter, and she's been arrested, taken away from her home for questioning, and taken to a prison pending trial for inciting hatred and enmity with a joke that she made about Turkey's religious schools. Apparently, at a concert in Istanbul, she quipped that one of her musicians' perversions stemmed from attending a religious school. And that comment got clipped and circulated on social media with a hashtag calling for her arrest. It's happened. And so there's all sorts of both sides mouthing off over there. Her supporters are saying, release the artist now. And her accusers are saying, trying to polarize Turkey is a hate crime and a disgrace to humanity, and inciting hatred is not an art form. So watch what goes on over there. Of course, Erdogan, the current president, he's very much Islamist, and his supporters, many members of his ruling party, are graduates of religious schools, and they've actually increased the number of religious schools to grow more of them.
Gosh.
Well, we all know that as far as religions go, humor is no laughing matter.
Right.
Hmm.
No sense of humor.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. Going to Iraq now then. You may be aware that they had an election last year and the winning party has not been able to form a government because they don't agree with some of the smaller parties. And so in exasperation, the leader of the winning party, a guy called Muqtada al-Sadr, he's a Shia Muslim cleric. He's given up. He said, I'm not playing this game anymore. I'm going to retire from politics. Well, as soon as his supporters heard that, because they've been campaigning outside the parliament building, trying to get a government under him to be formed. And as soon as he announced that, they all started rioting. There's been 23 deaths. And what else has happened? Fighting has been taking place between his militia, known as the Peace Brigade, and members of the Iraqi security forces. I hear your laughter.
Yeah, well, it's ironic. I'm not taking pleasure in people dying, but it is ironic that it sounds like something from a Monty Python skit, the Peace Brigade rioting violently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, your laughter speaks volumes. Okay, well, we've already overrun our time, so I'm going to briefly touch on a couple of things which I don't really think you need to comment on. It's just typical Christian hatred horror from the US. Apparently, a hate preacher called Stephen Anderson, who's actually banned from 34 countries, is still telling lies about gays and lesbians. And there's a video that I screened on the news yesterday. And another one, a Christian hate preacher called Jonathan Shelley, held a book burning. And again, there's a video on this. He's got a big dustbin and roaring gas flame. And guess what he's throwing? He's getting the children to throw into this funeral pyre. Guess what book he's throwing in there?
No.
Quran?
It's the Bible.
Non-KG.
Yeah, the Bible.
Yes.
Non-KG.
Crazy.
It could be worse. It could be worse. See, they could have chosen the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Mm-hmm.
But still.
Yes.
Gosh.
Well, there you go. There's only one Bible that he approves of, and it's the old KJV one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I do know of Afrikaner families who were split in half in the 1930s. Well, I actually not know, in 1953, when there was a new translation of the Afrikaans Bible.
Yeah.
And I know people in my family who still will only read the 1933 Afrikaans translation of the Bible, because that is the only true text that gives us the Afrikaans words of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Somehow or other, if you're religious, you have to also be dogmatic. Don't you? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, you've been wonderful, as usual. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Good day, all. Several clergy
Was the Pope appealing for peace, or was he praying for peace?
And the same applies to the Kaliningrad.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what do you have to say about that?